Chili Moon and Lotus Flower. The story goes that in the past, there was a Taoist in Jinan who wore a simple robe all year round, tied with a yellow belt around his waist, without wearing undershirts or pants. Every day, he used half a comb to comb his hair and used the teeth of the comb to shape his hair into what looked like a hat. He walked barefoot on the street during the day and slept outdoors at night. In winter, he could melt the ice and snow within a few feet of him. When this person first arrived in Jinan, he performed magic tricks on the streets. Many people rushed to give him things. There was a ruffian on the street who offered him wine and asked him to teach magic, but he refused. One time, while the Taoist was bathing in the river, the ruffian suddenly grabbed his clothes and threatened him. The Taoist said, "Please give me back my clothes, and I will teach you." The ruffian was afraid that he might change his mind and firmly refused. The Taoist asked, "Really not giving them to me?" The ruffian answered, "Yes." The Taoist fell silent, and suddenly his yellow belt turned into a snake several arms thick, coiling around the ruffian's body for 7 or 8 rounds. The snake lifted its head, opened its eyes in anger, and stuck out its tongue at him. The ruffian's face turned pale with fear, and he couldn't catch his breath, quickly kneeling down and begging for mercy. The Taoist then retrieved his yellow belt. Actually, the yellow belt wasn't a snake, but there was indeed a snake that had slithered into the city. With this, the Taoist's reputation grew even larger. An official heard about his extraordinary abilities and invited him as a guest. From then on, the Taoist frequently visited wealthy households. Officials from the city and prefecture also got to know him, inviting him to their banquets. One day, the Taoist decided to host a feast at the waterside pavilion to treat the officials and repay their hospitality. On that day, each official had an invitation from the Taoist, but they didn't know where these invitations came from. The officials arrived at the venue of the feast, and the Taoist greeted them. Upon entering, they found the pavilion empty, without tables or chairs, causing them to suspect that it was fake. The Taoist said to the officials, "I don't have servants. May I borrow your servants for a moment to help me?" They all agreed. The Taoist drew 2 doors on the wall, knocked on them, and the doors opened from the inside. Everyone rushed forward to look inside and saw vague figures moving about, with draped curtains, tables, and everything they needed. In a short while, things were passed from inside the doors, and the officials' attendants took them to the pavilion, being instructed not to speak to those inside. They exchanged items, sharing smiles. Before long, the pavilion was fully set up and exquisitely luxurious. The aroma of fine wine and the warmth of cooked meat emanated from inside the doors on the wall. The officials were all amazed. The pavilion faced the lake, and by June, tens of acres of lotus flowers stretched endlessly. However, in the current severe winter, outside the window was just emptiness, with only a lake of green water. One official sighed, "Today's feast is wonderful, but it's a pity we don't have lotus flowers to add to the atmosphere." As soon as he finished speaking, a clerk suddenly ran in and said, "The lotus leaves in the pond are lush." The officials were astonished, and they opened the window to look far away. Indeed, seeing lush greenery in the pond, interspersed with a few lotus blossoms. In the blink of an eye, millions of lotus flowers bloomed simultaneously. With the northern wind blowing, the fragrance of lotus permeated the air. The officials sent people to row over and pick the lotus flowers. They could see the clerk entering the midst of the lotus flowers from a distance, and all the officials admired his courage. Later, he turned the boat around and returned empty-handed. The officials asked why. The clerk said, "When I rowed over, I saw the lotus flowers in the distance. As I approached the northern shore, I saw the lotus flowers far to the south." The Taoist smiled and said, "These are illusory flowers." The officials were all full of admiration. After the banquet and the lotus blossoms disappeared, a sudden north wind blew, snapping all the lotus stalks, and not a single lotus flower was left. There was an observing official in Jidong who was quite fond of the Taoist, inviting him to his mansion and playing with him every day. One day, the observing official and a guest were drinking wine. They had a large jar of family-kept wine, and they only served 1 cup to each guest, not allowing them to drink more. However, after one cup, the guest found the taste so wonderful that he wanted more. The observing official insisted there was none left. The Taoist smiled at the guest and said, "You, a wine lover, really want to drink your fill? Just ask me." The guest requested it from him. The Taoist placed an empty jug in his sleeve and took it out a while later, pouring a cup for each person, just as he did with the observing official's precious wine. Everyone drank until they were intoxicated. The observing official was quite puzzled, so he checked his wine jar, only to find the seal intact, but the wine inside had been completely drunk. Feeling both embarrassed and angry, the observing official arrested the Taoist, accusing him of being a demon, and tortured him. Just as the stick was about to strike, the observing official suddenly felt a sharp pain in his thigh. Another strike and his buttocks split open. Even though the Taoist was shouting below the steps, the observing official's chair was already soaked in blood. Only then did the observing official order the Taoist to be spared from further beating and drove him away. After leaving Jidong, the Taoist's whereabouts became unknown. Later, someone encountered him in Jinling, seeing him dressed the same as before. When asked about his recent circumstances, he just smiled and didn't answer.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.